My son thought I was a helpless widow waiting to die. He was wrong. When he finally came to steal my house, he found out I owned his future. The lights were blinding, a stark, clinical white assault that washed out the faces of the 300 journalists, tech investors, and industry titans seated in the auditorium. The air inside the Kent Dynamics headquarters was cool, conditioned to a precise 68 degrees to protect the servers humming in the basement, but Julian felt like he was standing in a blast furnace. He squinted against the glare, his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps that burned his throat. He had sprinted through the cavernous marble lobby, past the confused receptionist who had tried to ask for his badge, and bullied his way past two burly security guards by screaming with frantic, wild-eyed conviction about a medical emergency involving his mother. His Italian designer suit, usually impeccable, was damp with sweat and clinging uncomfortably to his lower back. His tie was skewed to the left, and a sheen of perspiration coated his forehead. But none of that mattered. The indignity of his appearance was irrelevant. The potential legal consequences of trespassing were irrelevant. All that mattered was the figure standing on the stage. She stood next to Bevan Kent, the billionaire recluse whose tech empire Julian had worshipped since he was a freshman in business school. Bevan was a man who moved markets with a tweet, a man whose shadow loomed over Silicon Valley like a monolith, and there, standing in that shadow, looking impossibly small and fragile, was his mother. Martha. She was bathed in the spotlight, her silver hair shining like spun halo, standing quietly while Bevan spoke to the hushed crowd. Julian's stomach turned over, a violent lurch of nausea. His mind raced through the most logical, horrifying explanations. She must have wandered in off the street. The facility was large. Perhaps she had gotten lost looking for a pharmacy or a church service, and had stumbled through a secure door. She looked so out of place amidst the chrome and glass, a relic of a bygone era in her sensible shoes and modest posture. The thought of her drooling, rambling, or asking where George was on a global live stream, watched by millions, made bile rise in his throat. He could see the headlines already. Tech giant's launch ruined by senile intruder. And then the subheadline, once they identified her. Mother of Julian Vance, failed hedge fund manager. He couldn't let it happen. He couldn't let her humiliate him in front of the industry elite he had spent his entire career trying to impress. This was his world, not hers. She belonged in the knitting circle in the past, not here in the epicenter of the future. Julian surged forward, shoving past a cameraman who grunted in annoyance. "Mom!" he shouted. His voice cracked, echoing awkwardly in the acoustically perfect hall, shattering the reverent silence like a dropped glass. "Mom, get down from there!" He saw heads turn. A ripple of shock went through the room. People whispered, pointing at the frantic man waving his arms in the aisle. Julian didn't care. He was the hero here. He was the responsible son saving his confused mother from public mockery. He scrambled up the short stairs to the stage, his leather soles skidding on the polished floor, nearly sending him sprawling. He regained his balance and reached for her arm, his grip tight, desperate, transmitting all his panic into her humorous. "I'm so sorry, everyone," he panted, looking out at the sea of stunned faces. He tried to smile, to project an air of apologetic authority. She's not well. She's confused. Dementia, you know how it is. Come on, Mother. We're going home. The car is outside." The room went deadly silent. The air pressure seemed to drop, sucking the oxygen out of the space. The silence wasn't the confused murmur he expected. It was a heavy, expectant stillness. Martha didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She didn't look at the floor in shame or confusion. She simply turned her head slowly, looking at Julian's hand on her arm as if it were a foreign object, a piece of lint she needed to brush off. Then she looked up at his face. Her eyes were not the watery, vacant windows he expected. They were not the eyes of a woman who forgot where she put her keys. They were sharp, terrifyingly, brutally clear. They held a glint of steel he hadn't seen since he was a teenager, trying to lie about a report card. Bevan Kent didn't signal for security. He didn't look annoyed. He just stepped back, crossed his arms over his chest, and smiled. A small, knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes but spoke volumes. He looked like a man watching a chess game where checkmate had already been declared 3 moves ago. "Let go of me, Julian," Martha said. Her voice wasn't the wavering whisper he remembered from their brief obligatory phone calls. It wasn't the voice of the woman who asked about the weather. It was magnified by the lavalier microphone clipped to her lapel, booming through the auditorium speakers with a commanding resonance that vibrated in Julian's chest. It was the voice of a person who was used to being heard. "Mom, please," Julian hissed, panic clawing at his throat, his face burning. "You're making a scene. You don't know where you are. This is Kent Dynamics. You're embarrassing yourself." "I know exactly where I am," she said, her voice steady, iron hard, cutting through his hysteria like a laser. "The question is, Julian, do you?" To understand how a 72-year-old widow ended up on a stage with the world's most powerful tech mogul and why her own son thought she was losing her mind, one must look back 14 months. One must rewind the tape to the day George was buried, the day the rain turned the cemetery into a gray, weeping landscape. The funeral had been a blur of black umbrellas, wet wool, and generic condolences that people recited like lines from a bad play. He's in a better place. At least he didn't suffer. "Let us know if you need anything." They didn't mean it, of course. They were checking their watches, thinking about lunch, thinking about the traffic on the way home. Julian and his wife, Chloe, had stood by the graveside, huddled under a massive golf umbrella. Martha had watched them from the corner of her eye. They looked impatient. Julian kept checking his phone, shielding the screen from the rain. As the mourners dispersed, heading for their cars with relieved sighs, Martha had lingered behind a high hedge of yew. She wanted a moment of privacy, a moment to speak to George without an audience. That was when she heard the crunch of gravel on the other side of the greenery. "It's sad, obviously," Chloe's voice drifted over the hedge, sharp and impatient, cutting through the sound of the drizzle. "I mean, George was a sweet man, but honestly, Jules, what is she going to do with that big house all by herself? It's 4,000 square feet. She can barely work the thermostat. It's a waste of equity." Martha froze. Her hand, reaching out to touch a wet leaf, stopped in midair. "I know," Julian had sighed, the sound of a car door unlocking, following his words. "I've been thinking about it. I'll give her a few months to grieve, just for appearances. We don't want to look heartless." "Then we need to talk to her about downsizing. Sunset Gardens has some openings. She's going to be a lot of work, Chloe. She's helpless without Dad. She doesn't know how to pay a bill online. She doesn't know how to hire a plumber. She's just a relic now, a ghost in a museum." "A relic," Chloe echoed, laughing softly. "Well, relics belong in storage." They got into their Audi and drove away without saying goodbye. They promised to call. They promised to visit the following Sunday. Sunday came and went. The phone sat silent on the hallway table, a black plastic accusation. A week turned into a month. A month turned into a season. Martha sat in the house she and George had bought 40 years ago. It was too big, yes. The silence was heavy, pressing against her eardrums like water pressure at the bottom of the ocean. but Julian's assessment of her gnawed at her soul. Helpless, relic, storage. He saw her as an accessory to George, a housewife whose only skills were baking cookies, ironing shirts, and keeping the coasters straight. He had forgotten, or perhaps he never cared to know, that in the late 1970s, Martha hadn't just been baking. She had been managing the complex inventory logistics for George's hardware chain using COBOL, a language that was cutting edge at the time. She was the one who stayed up until 3:00 a.m., staring at green phosphor screens, debugging the payroll system so the employees could get their checks on time. She was the one who digitized his records when everyone else was using paper ledgers and filing cabinets. But she had stepped back to raise Julian. She had quieted her ambition so she could drive him to soccer practice, so she could help him with his science fairs, so she could be the good mother. She had made herself smaller so her son and husband could feel big. And now, alone in the silence, looking at the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light, she realized she had made herself invisible. She tried to reach out. She refused to accept the silence at first. She called Julian on his birthday, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. "Mom, I can't talk," he snapped, the noise of city traffic loud in the background. "I'm in the middle of a crisis with the Asia accounts. The market is crashing. I'll call you back." He didn't. She called Chloe to ask about the grandchildren, hoping for a connection there. "Oh, Martha, they're wildly busy with soccer and violin and Mandarin lessons," Chloe said, her voice dripping with that patronizing sweetness people reserve for children and the infirm. "You know how it is. We barely have time to breathe. Maybe we can squeeze in a visit around Christmas. Send them a card. They love getting mail." It was March. Christmas was 9 months away. Martha hung up the phone. She walked into the living room and sat on the floral sofa. She looked at the knitting needles Chloe had sent her as a keep busy gift, along with 3 skeins of hideous beige yarn. "Keep busy," she whispered, like a toddler. She picked up the needles. She felt the weight of them. Then, with a sudden surge of white-hot anger, she snapped them in half. The crack was loud and satisfying. "No," she said to the empty room, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "I am not done. I am not a relic. And I will not be put in storage." Martha went into George's old office the next morning. It was a room she hadn't entered in months. It smelled of stale paper and lemon polish, a museum of the 90s. Bulky CRT monitors sat like tombstones. Fax machines gathered dust. Stacks of yellowing invoices sat in wire baskets. But in the corner, pushed aside under a layer of gray dust, was the laptop Julian had given George 3 years prior. It was a hand-me-down, passed along when Julian upgraded to the latest ultra-slim model. "Here, Dad," he had said. "You can use this for, I don't know, solitaire." Martha grabbed a cloth and wiped it down. She plugged it in. The fan whirred to life, a sound like a small plane taking off. The screen flickered, then glowed blue. She didn't go to Facebook to look at photos of a family that ignored her. She didn't open Solitaire. Instead, she opened the browser and typed a query she hadn't thought about in decades. She navigated to the forums, Stack Overflow, GitHub, the digital watering holes of the modern world. It felt like being an archaeologist brushing away sand from a lost city. The interface was sleeker, faster, more colorful. The languages had changed. Python, Rust, Go, names she didn't recognize initially. They sounded like snakes and metals and verbs, but as she clicked through the repositories, reading the raw code, the structures underneath revealed themselves. The syntax was different, yes. The punctuation was new. But the logic was the same. It was the universal language of cause and effect, of loops and variables, of if then else. It was beautiful. It was pure. It was a world where things either worked or they didn't, and no one cared how old you were or what you wore. She started small. She created a username, MG Vance, a nod to her maiden name, Vance, and M for Martha. No photo, no age, no gender, just a black circle avatar, just code. She spent her nights devouring documentation. Her eyes burned, her back ached from the cheap office chair, but her mind was alive. Her brain, starving for stimulation after years of stagnation and small talk, drank it up like a dry sponge in a rainstorm. She felt the synapses firing again, connections rebuilding. The fog of grief began to lift, replaced by the crisp, cold clarity of algorithms. She started answering questions on forums. At first, simple syntax errors that junior developers were stuck on. A missing semicolon here, an unclosed bracket there. Then, optimization problems. One night at 2 a.m., a user named CodeNinja99 posted a frantic query. Can't get this recursive loop to terminate without crashing the memory stack. Deadline in 4 hours. Help. Martha stared at the block of code. She poured herself another cup of tea. She traced the logic with her finger on the screen. It was clumsy. It was trying to do too much at once. She typed her reply, "Your base case is flawed. You're indexing the array continuously without a break condition. You're eating your own tail. Try this." She wrote 10 lines of clean, efficient code. She posted the fix. 3 hours later, a notification pinged loud in the silent house. "Holy crap, Vance! That's elegant. That's old school, but genius. Who are you? I owe you my degree." Martha smiled at the screen in the dark room. The blue light illuminated her wrinkles, but her eyes were young. "I'm nobody," she whispered. "I'm a ghost in the machine." And she was just getting started. 6 months later, Martha was no longer just answering forum posts. She was hunting. She moved through the digital underground with confidence. The challenge appeared on a cryptographic security forum known for its difficulty. It was a bounty, highlighted in flashing red text. Bounty, $50,000. Issuer, Kent Dynamics. Problem, optimize the latency in our neural net handshake protocol. Current lag, 140 milliseconds. Target, 50 knitters. Notes, we have tried everything. Good luck. Martha stared at the code attached to the bounty. It was massive. It was a mess of spaghetti logic. It was brilliant, certainly, written by some of the best minds in the industry. But it was chaotic. It looked like it had been written by 20 different geniuses who refused to talk to each other, patching over each other's work. She downloaded the package. She worked on it for 3 weeks. She barely slept. She stopped cooking meals, eating toast over the sink to save time. She forgot to water the ferns in the sunroom, watching them turn brown and brittle as her code grew greener and more vibrant. She covered the walls of George's office with sticky notes, drawing diagrams of data flow. She saw the pattern the engineers had missed. They were so obsessed with security that they were routing the data through a redundant check that was checking itself, an infinite loop of caution. It was like locking a door, then checking if it was locked, then checking if the person checking the lock was trustworthy. It was slowing the whole system down. She didn't just patch it. She rewrote the kernel. She stripped it down to its bones, removing the ego from the code. She used a logic structure she hadn't used since 1978, a simple linear flow that modern coders thought was obsolete. She ran the simulation on her humming laptop. The fan screamed. The progress bar crawled. Latency, 34 millions. She gasped. Her heart hammered harder than it had on her wedding day, harder than when she gave birth to Julian. She had beaten the target by 16 milliseconds. In the world of high-frequency trading and AI, 16 milliseconds was an eternity. It was a fortune. She submitted the patch. 2 days of silence followed. The doubt crept in. The imposter syndrome that plagues every creative mind settled over her. She convinced herself she was foolish. She was an old woman playing a young man's game. They were probably laughing at her submission. Then, an email arrived. The subject line was simple. From Office of Bevan Kent. Subject, regarding your submission. She opened it, her hands trembling so hard she almost dropped the mouse. Dear MG Vance, your code isn't just functional, it's art. You just saved us 6 months of R&D and potentially millions in hardware costs. The payment has been escrowed and will be released immediately. But more importantly, I want to know how you approach the node structure. It feels classical. Like old-school mainframe architecture applied to quantum logic. It has a patience that modern code lacks. We need to talk. BK. She checked her bank account. The alert popped up. Deposit, $50,000. It was more money than she had seen in years. It was freedom. She looked at the mirror in the hallway. She saw gray hair, wrinkles, a cardigan with a coffee stain. She looked like a grandmother waiting for a bus. If only you knew, Bevan, she chuckled softly, the sound echoing in the empty house. If only you knew who your savior was. Martha's life split in two. A schizophrenic existence of dull reality and electric potential. By day, she was Mom. She played the role Julian expected. Julian called once a month, his voice always rushed, always impatient, always condescending. Mom, did you get the mail I sent? The forms for the insurance? Yes, dear, I'm looking at them, she would say, her voice feigning the frailty he expected, pitching it slightly higher, slightly more tremulous. Well, don't just look at them, sign them. And try not to mess up the dates this time, okay? Chloe says we need to make sure your assets are simplified. We don't want you overwhelmed. Simplified, she repeated, staring at her dual-monitor setup where she was currently rerouting a server farm in Helsinki to optimize data flow for a global logistics firm. I understand, Julian. I wouldn't want to be overwhelmed. Great. Look, I gotta go. Big meeting. You wouldn't understand the pressure. It's a bear market out there. I'm sure I wouldn't, she said, suppressing a laugh. Go get them, Tiger. She hung up. Then she switched windows to her encrypted video conference with the Kent Dynamics lead engineering team. She kept her camera off, her avatar a static black void. She used a voice modulator that deepened her tone slightly, not to sound like a man, just to sound ambiguous, authoritative, and ageless. Vance, you there? The lead engineer, a 25-year-old prodigy named Skylar, who wore hoodies and drank Red Bull, asked. I'm here, she said into her headset. Julian is right about one thing. The pressure is on. But Skylar, your API calls are sloppy. You're leaking memory in the third quadrant. Clean them up, or the latency will kill the launch. Yes, Vance. Sorry. On it right now. Bevan Kent himself chimed in from his private line, his voice rich with amusement and respect. Listen to Vance, everyone. He, or she, is the only one making sense today. Vance, what do you think about the scaling issue? It's not a scaling issue, Bevan, she said confidently. It's a bandwidth allocation issue. Reroute the subnet. She was earning $15,000 a month as a retainer, then $30,000. Then, when she architected the foundation for Vance AI, the project that would define the company's future, Bevan put her on a contract worth 7 figures. She bought a new wardrobe, sharp blazers, silk scarves, Italian leather shoes. She bought expensive face cream. She ordered gourmet meals delivered to the door. She wore the suits inside the house, pacing the floorboards as she dictated code. She felt powerful. She felt alive. But outside, when she went to the grocery store, she wore the old cardigan. She wore the orthopedic shoes. She needed them to keep underestimating her. She wasn't ready to be seen. Not yet. The secrecy was her armor. It had been 14 months since the funeral when the phone rang. It was Julian. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Mom, he said. No pleasantries. No, how are you? His voice was tight, vibrating with a stress that Martha recognized instantly. It was the sound of a man on the ledge. "Chloe and I are coming down this weekend." "Oh, that's wonderful, Julian. I haven't seen you in over a year. I'll bake a—" "No," he cut her off, his voice harsh. "Don't bake. We're not coming for a social visit. We need to talk. Serious talk." "Is everything okay?" she asked, leaning back in her ergonomic office chair. "Not really. The market is killing me, Mom. And look, we need to discuss the house. It's too big for you. It's dangerous. You're getting older. Chloe found a place. Sunset Gardens. It's assisted living, very high end. They have nurses, activities, bingo. It's safe." Bingo. The word hung in the air like a slap. "Julian," she said, her voice cooling, dropping the tremulous act for a split second. "I don't want to move. I am happy here." "It's not really up for debate, Mom," he snapped. "I have power of attorney. Dad set it up that way in case you became incapacitated. And honestly, you sound confused lately. You're isolated. You're rambling. We're doing this for you. We're doing this because we love you." He wasn't doing it for her. Martha knew Julian's financials better than he did. She had audited his public records during her lunch breaks. She knew about the bad bets on crypto. She knew about the second mortgage on his condo. He was underwater. He was leveraged to the hilt. He needed the equity from the estate, her estate, to bail out his bad investments. He needed the $1 million locked in these walls. "When are you coming?" she asked calmly. "Saturday. Have the keys ready. We're listing it Monday. I've already spoken to a realtor." He hung up. Martha sat there for a long time as the sun set, casting long, melancholy shadows across the room. She looked at her screens. The Vance AI launch was on Monday, the biggest day of her career, the day her work would change the world. And on Saturday, her son was coming to put her in a home and sell her sanctuary. "Power of attorney," she whispered. She remembered signing those papers years ago, blindly trusting them to care for her, believing that family meant loyalty. She picked up her phone. She didn't call a lawyer. She dialed a private number. "Bevan? Vance, everything okay? You sound different. I need a favor, a big one, and I need to meet you in person." Martha spent Friday packing, but it wasn't the packing of a victim. It was the packing of a soldier leaving base. She didn't take the furniture. She didn't take the china she had received as wedding gifts. She didn't take the heavy oak table where they had eaten Thanksgiving dinners. She took only what mattered: George's watch, her old photo albums, her server rack, her hard drives. She called a service Bevan recommended, a high-end relocation team known as the Cleaners. They arrived at midnight, moving with military precision, silent and efficient. They packed the furniture, the rugs, the heavy velvet curtains that had hung for 20 years. They stripped the house bare. By Saturday morning, the house was a shell. It echoed with every footstep. It smelled of nothing. No lemon polish, no baking, just empty air. Martha stood in the foyer one last time. She looked at the spot on the stairs where Julian had fallen and broken his arm when he was 7. She looked at the kitchen where she and George had danced to the radio. She felt a pang of sadness, sharp and deep. But it was fleeting. This house was a museum of a life that was over. She thought about the years she spent here, raising Julian, loving George, being the invisible glue that held this family together while they took her for granted. She realized she had been waiting for permission to stop being Mom and start being Martha again. Julian had just given her that permission, though not in the way he intended. She took the deed to the house out of her bag. She had signed it over to a blind trust yesterday. The trust was managed by Kent Dynamics Legal. The house was no longer hers. It wasn't Julian's either. It was effectively a corporate asset now, frozen until further notice. Even with power of attorney, Untangling the corporate web would take Julian years, and money he didn't have. She left the keys on the bare granite of the kitchen counter. Beside them, she left a single note on crisp white paper. Julian, I hope you find what you're looking for. Mom. She walked out the front door. The morning air was crisp. A black town car with tinted windows was waiting at the curb, the engine idling softly. The driver, a massive man in a suit, opened the door. To the city, ma'am? Yes, she said, not looking back at the empty windows. To the future. Julian's Audi pulled into the driveway at noon on Saturday. The car needed a wash. Chloe was in the passenger seat, scrolling furiously on her phone, her face illuminated by the blue light. God, this place is depressing, Chloe muttered, not bothering to look up at the house. Look at the lawn. It's overgrown. The gutters are full. We'll landscape it before the open house, Julian said, wiping sweat from his forehead. He was already counting the commission. He needed this sale. He needed the liquidity within 30 days, or he was insolvent. It has good bones. We can list it for $1.2 million. They walked to the door. Julian fumbled with his keys, annoyed that his mother hadn't opened it yet to welcome them. Usually, she would be standing there, eager, annoying. Mom! He yelled, banging on the wood. We're here! Open up! He pushed the door open. It was unlocked. Silence greeted them. Not the quiet of a sleeping house, but the dead, hollow silence of a vacant one. The kind of silence that hurts the ears. Mom? Julian walked into the living room. Empty. The floorboards were bare. The fireplace was swept clean. He walked into the dining room. Empty. Even the curtains were gone. The light streamed in, harsh and unforgiving. What the hell? Julian spun around, panic rising. Did she get robbed? Did someone clean her out? Julian, Chloe called from the kitchen. Her voice was trembling, high and scared. He ran in. She was holding the note. The keys were next to it. She sold it, Julian whispered, reading the deed paperwork left beside the note. The stamps were official. The signatures were wet ink. She transferred it to a trust. She can't do that. I have power of attorney. She's incompetent. She did it months ago, Chloe said, pointing at the date on the transfer document. Julian, where is she? If she sold the house, where is the money? Where is she? Julian pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it twice. He picked it up, cracking the screen. He had a family tracking app installed, something he used to keep an eye on her but rarely checked because he didn't care where she went. He opened it. The map loaded slowly. The dot pinged. It wasn't at the local bingo hall. It wasn't at the hospital. It wasn't at the grocery store. The blue dot was in the city. Specifically, it was stationary in the middle of the financial district. She's at Kent Dynamics? Julian frowned, staring at the map. Why would she be there? That's the headquarters. Maybe she's confused, Chloe said, grabbing his arm. Maybe she wandered into the lobby. Julian, if she causes a scene, that's the biggest company in the world. You're trying to get a meeting with them for your fund. If your mother is there drooling in the lobby, you're finished. Get in the car, Julian said, grabbing the keys, his eyes wide with terror. We have to get her before she ruins me. The drive to the city was a blur of speeding tickets, honking horns, and sheer panic. Julian drove like a maniac, weaving through traffic, his mind replaying scenarios of his mother being dragged out by security, of the news crews filming her confusion. He parked the car illegally in front of the glass monolith of the Kent Dynamics Tower. He stormed inside, Chloe trailing behind on her heels, struggling to keep up. The lobby was a cathedral of technology. Huge screens, floating holograms, silent security. My mother! Julian shouted at the reception desk, slamming his hand down. She's elderly, confused. The tracker says she's here. I need to get her." "Sir, you can't go up there," the guard said, stepping forward. "The launch event is happening in the main auditorium. It's restricted access." "I don't care about your launch. She's a liability," Julian screamed. "She's my mother. She doesn't know what she's doing." He pushed past the guard, flashing an expired VIP pass from a previous tech conference he had attended years ago. Through sheer force of will, adrenaline, and the confusion of the moment, he made it to the elevators. He hit the button for the auditorium level. The doors opened. He heard the applause. He ran toward it, which brought him back to the moment on stage. The silence, the stare, the realization that the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. "I know exactly where I am," Martha repeated, her voice echoing through the hall. "The question is, Julian, do you?" Julian froze. The heat of the moment drained away, leaving him cold. He looked at Bevan Kent. Bevan wasn't looking at Julian with anger. He was looking at him with pity. Then he looked at Martha with pure, unadulterated admiration. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bevan said, leaning into the podium, his voice calm, smooth, and deadly. "I think there has been a misunderstanding. This man seems to think he is rescuing a helpless old woman. He seems to think that intellect expires at age 60. A murmur went through the crowd. Journalists were typing furiously. "But," Bevan continued, gesturing to Martha with a sweep of his hand, "I would like to introduce you to the person who saved this company, the architect of the neural net you saw today, the person who solved the latency paradox that stumped our entire team, the person who's been running our AI division remotely for the last year." Bevan paused for effect. The silence was absolute. "Please meet M.G. Vance." The room exploded. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. Camera flashes went off like strobe lights, blinding and rapid. The reporters gasped. M.G. Vance was a legend on the forums, a faceless genius everyone assumed was a 20-year-old MIT prodigy or a reclusive Russian hacker. Julian stepped back, his heel catching on the edge of the podium. He stumbled. "Vance," he whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "You? But you knit? You bake? Your mom?" Martha stepped forward. She looked taller, formidable. The lights caught the sharp angles of her face, revealing the strength he had ignored. "I did those things, Julian," she said, her voice soft, but amplified to reach the back row. "I baked, I knit, I waited. Because that is all you allowed me to be. You looked at me and you didn't see a person. You saw a burden. You saw a house to sell. You saw a bank account to drain." She turned to the cameras. She squared her shoulders. "I am not a relic," she said, her voice soaring, filled with the power of a woman who has reclaimed her own name. "And I am certainly not lost. I was hiding. But I'm done hiding." Security finally arrived, but not for Martha. Two large men in suits appeared at the edge of the stage. "Sir, you need to leave," one guard said, placing a heavy hand on Julian's shoulder. "But that's my mother," Julian stammered, looking from the guard to the woman commanding the stage. He looked like a child now, lost and small. "She doesn't look like she needs you," the guard said, pulling him away. Julian was escorted out the side door, Chloe following him, her face pale, her phone clutching in her hand, as she deleted tweets she had made about her annoying mother-in-law. They stood on the sidewalk, the cold wind hitting them. Julian checked his phone. The news was already trending. The real Vance. Grandma Coder. Age is not a limit. His mother's face was everywhere. His own face, frantic, sweaty, shouting, was being memed as the idiot son. Inside, the press conference ended. Martha walked off stage, shaking hands, accepting business cards from CEOs who used to look through her as if she were glass. She spoke about latency, about node structures, about the future of AI. She was brilliant. She was radiant. Bevan walked beside her as they headed to the VIP elevators. "That was quite the reveal, Martha. I think you broke the internet." "It was necessary," she said, smoothing her blazer. "I needed to burn the bridge to build the skyscraper. I couldn't let him drag me back." Later that night, Julian called. Martha looked at the phone buzzing on her glass coffee table. The ID flashed. "Julian!" She didn't answer. She let it ring. She let it go to voicemail. Then she picked it up and sent a text. "Julian, I have paid off your debts, the condo, the credit cards, the bad loans. Consider it your inheritance, given early. There is nothing left for you to wait for. Do not come to the penthouse. Do not call. You wanted me to be independent." "I am. You wanted me out of your hair? I am gone. Learn to stand on your own 2 feet. It's never too late to grow up. Goodbye." She blocked the number. She placed the phone on the marble table of her new company apartment, overlooking the city lights. The skyline glittered like a circuit board. She wasn't a widow in a dusty house anymore. She wasn't a relic. She was MG Vance. And for the first time in 40 years, the silence wasn't heavy. It was full of potential. It was the sound of a blank page, waiting to be written.